"Touch this horse and the ranch is yours," said the rancher, laughing loudly before the crowd. No one imagined that the skinny boy, with his quiet gaze, would have the courage to accept. He walked up to the animal, faced its fury, and touched it with a calmness that froze the audience. In that touch, something broke, and it wasn't just the silence. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The sun hadn't yet risen when Ethan was already up, adjusting the worn boots that had belonged to his father. At 12 years old, his small hands carried the weight of responsibilities that many adults would never know. The ranch that once belonged to his family now belonged to Colonel Sullivan, a man with an inflated chest and harsh words, who treated workers like disposable objects. Ethan walked through the fields with silent steps, observing every detail of the land that still held memories of his father, John Walker, the best horse trainer in the region. 4 years had passed since a fever had taken his parents, leaving only him and Grandma Rose, a frail woman with a spirit as strong as tempered steel. She coughed heavily in the morning, and Ethan pretended not to notice the threads of blood on the handkerchief she quickly hid. "Boy, you have your father's gift," Grandma Rose would murmur every night, caressing Ethan's dark hair as he pretended to sleep. He talked to animals as if they were people. Said every animal has a story to tell, you just need to know how to listen. In the corral, Ethan observed the horses with special attention. There was something in their eyes that had fascinated him since he was small, a deep intelligence that went beyond instinct. When nobody was looking, he would approach slowly, whispering soft words, and the animals seemed to understand every syllable. It was as if there was a secret language between them, inherited from the father he never really got to know. Colonel Sullivan treated Ethan with a mixture of contempt and utility. The boy worked hard, never complained, and had a special way with animals that even the rancher couldn't deny. But Ethan saw in the man's eyes a cruelty that frightened him. It was as if the colonel liked to remind everyone that he was the owner, that he had the power to decide who stayed and who left. "That kid gets on my nerves," Sullivan would comment to other ranchers. "Always watching everything with those owl eyes, like he's judging. But he works well and he's good with the animals. For now, he's useful." In the small wooden house where they lived, Grandma Rose told stories about the time when the family had possessions. Ethan loved hearing about his grandfather, who built that ranch with his own hands, and about his father, who named the horses and treated each one like a child. "Your father said that respect is earned with patience, never with force," she would whisper. "A real man doesn't need to shout to be heard." Ethan treasured these words. During the day, while cleaning the corrals and caring for the animals, he practiced the gestures he imagined his father made. Gentle movements, low voice, never approaching from the front to avoid startling them. The other ranch hands sometimes mocked him, calling him animal whisperer, but Ethan didn't care. He knew he was doing something right when he saw the horses calm down in his presence. There was one horse in particular that caught his attention. Thunder was a magnificent animal, black as night, but with an explosive temperament that terrorized everyone on the ranch. He had already thrown 3 experienced cowboys and broken 2 fences trying to escape. Colonel Sullivan spoke of him with a mixture of pride and anger, as if the animal were both his greatest trophy and his greatest frustration. "That damn horse cost a fortune," the rancher would grumble. "They said he was pure Arabian blood, but he's a demon with 4 legs. One day I'll figure out what to do with him." Ethan observed Thunder from a distance, noticing things others didn't see. The horse wasn't just angry, he was in pain. The way he favored his left hind leg, how his eyes contracted when he stepped on uneven ground, how he ground his teeth even when there was nothing in his mouth. Something was hurting that animal, and the pain made him furious with the world. One particularly hot afternoon, Ethan was organizing the harnesses when he heard a commotion coming from the main corral. Thunder had broken another rope and was running in circles, neighing in a way that seemed more anguish than anger. The ranch hands were shouting and trying to lasso him, but the horse was beside himself. Ethan dropped everything and approached slowly. Ignoring the men's shouts to stay back, he began to whisper the words Grandma had taught him, the same ones his father used. To everyone's surprise, Thunder stopped running and looked directly at the boy. For a moment that seemed eternal, horse and child stared at each other, as if having a silent conversation. "Get out of there, kid!" shouted the foreman. "That beast will kill you." But Ethan didn't move. There was something in those dark eyes of the horse, a silent plea that he recognized. It was the same expression he saw in the mirror when no one was looking, the same silent request for understanding that he had carried in his chest since becoming an orphan. Colonel Sullivan came running, his face red with anger. "What is that brat doing there? Get him away from my horse before something terrible happens." But before anyone could move, something extraordinary happened. Thunder lowered his head, a gesture of submission that no one had ever seen him make. Ethan extended his hand slowly, and the horse let him touch his muzzle. The silence that followed was as deep as a well. "My God," murmured one of the ranch hands. "How did a boy do what none of us could?" Colonel Sullivan stood still, not knowing how to react. His expression oscillated between admiration and something that looked very much like fear. At that moment, Ethan was no longer just the orphan who worked on his land. He was someone who possessed a gift the colonel didn't understand, a power he couldn't control, and that left him deeply unsettled. The news of what had happened spread through the ranch like wildfire in dry pasture. Within a few days, everyone in the region knew that the orphan boy had managed to touch Thunder, the horse no one could tame. The reactions were diverse. Some thought it had been luck, others whispered about inherited gifts, and many simply couldn't believe it. Ethan continued his routine as if nothing had changed, but he felt the different looks upon him. Colonel Sullivan observed him with a mixture of curiosity and distrust, like someone studying a problem that needed solving. During meals in the humble house he shared with Grandma Rose, he recounted the details of the day, and she listened with a proud smile on her lips. "Your father was there with you in that moment," she would say, her eyes shining despite her persistent cough. "John Walker always knew you would inherit his gift. Animals sense people with pure hearts, my little grandson." 3 weeks after the incident came the day of the annual agricultural fair, the most important event in the region. Ranchers from neighboring towns came to show their best animals, negotiate cattle, and display their properties. For Colonel Sullivan, it was an opportunity to demonstrate his wealth and power before his competitors. The fair took place in the town square, a place that transformed into a great open-air theater. Colorful stalls, animal sounds, voices negotiating prices, and the mixed smell of earth, sweat, and hope created a unique atmosphere. Ethan accompanied the colonel to help with the horses, his curious eyes absorbing every detail of that new world. Colonel Sullivan paraded his best animals, but it was Thunder who stole all the attention. The black horse, imposing and still unpredictable, attracted admiring glances and whispered comments. Several buyers approached with interest, but the price Sullivan asked was exorbitant. "This horse is worth an entire ranch," he would say, puffing out his chest with pride. "He's pure Arabian blood, son of champions. I just haven't found a trainer worthy of him yet." It was then that his buddy, Colonel Thompson, an even more arrogant and wealthy man, made a comment that would change everything. "Sullivan, you talk so much about this horse, but everyone knows he's untamable. I bet even you can't get close to him without being thrown off." The challenge was set. Other ranchers joined the conversation, and soon a small crowd formed around the two men. Colonel Sullivan, who never backed down from a provocation, especially in front of his peers, felt his honor being questioned. "Untamable nonsense," he responded, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "I challenge anyone here to approach this horse. Whoever can touch him without being attacked wins an entire property," the crowd murmured in surprise. It was an absurd bet, made in the heat of the moment and wounded pride. Several men looked at each other, but no one dared to accept. Everyone knew Thunder's reputation and the accidents he had caused. Ethan was organizing the harnesses when he heard the proposal. Something moved within him, a voice that seemed to echo from his father's memories and his grandmother's teachings. The image of Grandma Rose coughing in the morning, trying to hide her weakness, came to his mind. If he could get a property, he could take proper care of her, give her the rest she deserved. Without thinking of the consequences, Ethan stepped forward in the crowd. "I accept the challenge." The silence that followed was total. All conversations stopped. All eyes turned to the 12-year-old boy who dared to challenge an animal that terrorized grown men. Colonel Sullivan turned red with embarrassment. "Get out of the way, kid. This is men's talk." But Ethan didn't back down. "You said whoever could touch the horse would win a property. You didn't say there was a minimum age." The ranchers began to laugh, some mocking the boy's courage, others admiring his boldness. Colonel Thompson, amused by his rival's embarrassment, prodded, "Well, Sullivan, the kid's right. You didn't specify anything about age, unless you want to go back on your word." Trapped by his own arrogance and the gaze of dozens of people, Colonel Sullivan had no choice. "Fine," he said through clenched teeth, "but when this brat gets trampled, don't say I didn't warn you." A rope was stretched, creating an improvised arena. Thunder was brought in, and his agitation was visible. The horse seemed to sense the tension in the air, stomping his hooves on the ground and neighing loudly. Many people in the crowd took steps backward, instinctively moving away from danger. Ethan walked to the rope, taking a deep breath. He closed his eyes for a moment and imagined his father beside him, guiding his steps. When he opened them again, there was a strange calmness on his face, a determination that impressed even the most skeptical men. "Boy, are you sure about this?" asked an older cowboy, concerned. "This beast has already sent 3 men to the hospital." Ethan nodded, his voice firm despite his age. "I'm sure." He entered the improvised arena, and Thunder immediately became more agitated. The horse reared up, bared his teeth, kicked in the air. The crowd shouted, some begging for the boy to get out of there before it was too late. But Ethan didn't run. Instead, he stopped where he was and simply observed. He ignored the furious neighs, the hooves that stamped dangerously close to him, the foam coming from the animal's mouth. He looked directly into Thunder's eyes and saw what he had seen that afternoon in the corral: pain. "I know you're suffering," whispered Ethan, his voice too low for the crowd to hear, but clear enough for the horse. "I know what it's like to feel pain and not be able to tell anyone." Slowly, very slowly, Ethan began to approach. Each step was calculated, each movement telegraphed clearly so the animal could predict his intentions. When he was just a few yards away, he stopped again. Thunder was still agitated, but something had changed in his eyes. The fury was beginning to give way to curiosity. The boy wasn't behaving like other humans. He didn't shout, didn't carry ropes or whips, didn't try to dominate him by force. "Let me help you," murmured Ethan, extending his hand slowly. And then, to the amazement of all present, including Ethan himself, something extraordinary happened. Thunder stopped rearing up. His eyes, which before had blazed with fury, now fixed on the boy with a different intensity. Ethan continued approaching, each step a silent declaration that he didn't intend to cause pain. When he finally got close enough, he noticed something that made his heart ache. The horse was subtly limping, favoring his left hind leg. His eyes showed not only anger, but a deep agony that he couldn't express. Ethan bent down slowly, ignoring the nervous murmurs of the crowd, and observed more carefully. "He's hurt," said Ethan, his voice still low but now audible to some. "Look how he's not putting weight on his hind leg." Some men leaned in to see better, but most were still focused on the danger the horse represented. Colonel Sullivan shouted impatiently, "Stop stalling, kid! Either touch him or get out of there!" Ethan ignored the pressure. He moved even closer until he could gently touch Thunder's neck. The horse stiffened for a moment but didn't attack. It was as if he recognized in the gentleness of that touch something he hadn't felt for a long time. "Can I see your hoof?" whispered Ethan, as if the animal could answer. To everyone's surprise, Thunder allowed the boy to bend down and examine his left hind hoof. Ethan lifted the hoof carefully and immediately saw the problem. A sharp stone was deeply embedded in the hoof, causing a painful inflammation that explained all the animal's aggression. "There's a stone here!" Ethan shouted to the crowd, his voice now filled with emotion. "That's why he's angry. He's not mean, he's just in pain." The revelation caused a buzz in the crowd. Some men approached to see better, and even Colonel Sullivan descended from his elevated position to verify the boy's discovery. Ethan worked with infinite patience, speaking softly to Thunder while trying to remove the stone. The horse became agitated several times, but always calmed down when he heard the boy's reassuring voice. After several minutes of careful work, Ethan managed to extract the stone, which was larger than it had appeared from the outside. The moment the stone came out, Thunder neighed loudly, but not in anger. It was a sound of relief, almost human in its expression of gratitude. The horse put his hind leg on the ground for the first time in months, testing the weight. Then, to the absolute amazement of all present, he lowered his head and gently rested it against Ethan's chest. The silence that followed was profound and sacred. Hundreds of people watched a scene that none of them would ever forget. A 12-year-old orphan boy embracing a horse that until recently was considered untamable. Both united by an understanding that transcended words, the crowd erupted in applause and shouts of admiration. Men who had come there to mock now looked on with respect. Women wiped tears from their eyes, touched by the beauty of the moment. Children pointed in wonder, as if they had witnessed a miracle. But not everyone was celebrating. Colonel Sullivan was pale, realizing that he had just promised an entire property to a 12-year-old boy. His mind worked quickly, looking for a way out of the commitment he had made publicly. "Well," he began, his voice hesitant, "that was impressive, but touching the horse was just the beginning. What I meant was completely taming the animal. Anyone can touch an injured animal, but truly taming it." Murmurs of protest began to emerge from the crowd. Colonel Thompson, amused by his rival's desperation, intervened. "Come on, Sullivan, that's not what you said. Your words were clear. Whoever can touch him without being attacked wins an entire property." The boy did exactly that. Pressured by dozens of witnesses and with his reputation at stake, Colonel Sullivan found himself at a crossroads. If he completely backed down, he would be seen as a man without honor. If he honored the original bet, he would lose a fortune to a poor boy. That's when he had an idea he thought brilliant. "All right," he said, forcing a smile. "The boy really did touch the horse, but what if we make this more interesting? I'll make a new proposal. If he can completely tame Thunder in 30 days, not only does he win a property, but he wins this entire ranch where he works. But if he can't," he paused dramatically, savoring what he considered his revenge. "If he can't, he works for me for free for the rest of his life, and his grandmother too. How about it, kid? Do you accept the bet?" Silence reigned again. Now it was different, loaded with tension and expectation. Ethan looked at Thunder, who was still calm beside him, then at the crowd waiting for his answer. He thought of Grandma Rose, who coughed more and more at night. He thought of the humble house where they lived, the scarce food, the lack of money for medicine. But more than that, he thought of the connection he had felt with Thunder, the certainty that he could help that animal find peace. There was something in the horse's gaze that told him this was his chance to honor his father's memory and build a better future. "I accept," said Ethan, his voice firm, echoing through the silent square. The crowd erupted again, this time in a mixture of admiration, concern, and excitement. Bets began to be made among those present. Some thought the boy was too brave for his own good. Others saw in him something special that deserved a chance. Colonel Sullivan extended his hand to seal the deal, confident that he had found a way out of the situation while keeping his property and gaining free workers for the rest of his life. But when he shook Ethan's small hand, something in the boy's eyes bothered him. It wasn't fear he saw there, not even anxiety. It was pure determination, the same he had seen in the boy's father's eyes years ago. And it made him question for the first time whether he hadn't gravely underestimated the adversary he had just created. The 30 days that followed were the most challenging of Ethan's life. News of the bet spread throughout the region, and each day brought curious visitors who came to see the boy who had dared to challenge Colonel Sullivan. Some rooted for him, others came just to witness what they considered an announced disaster. Ethan woke before dawn and went straight to the corral where Thunder was kept. The horse, with his hoof now healed, showed a completely different personality. He was still imposing and strong, but the aggression had given way to a curious intelligence and a willingness to learn. "Good morning, friend," Ethan would say every morning, and Thunder would respond with a soft neigh that almost sounded like a greeting. The boy had discovered that the horse responded better to whispered commands than shouted ones, to gentle gestures than abrupt movements. But not everything was tranquil. Colonel Sullivan, realizing that Ethan was really making progress, began to create subtle obstacles. He ordered the other ranch hands not to help the boy, cut off the supply of some essential equipment, and even sabotage some sections to make the work more difficult. "This kid is getting too smart for his own good," he muttered to the foreman. "Let's see if he can tame the horse without a proper saddle, without a new halter, without anyone's help." But Ethan didn't lose heart. He remembered Grandma Rose's words about his father. John Walker said a true horse trainer doesn't need expensive equipment, just patience and respect. He improvised, adapted, and continued training Thunder with the resources he had. During the second week, something unexpected happened. Emma, Colonel Sullivan's daughter, appeared at the corral. She had observed the training from a distance and been fascinated by the gentleness Ethan showed with the animal. "You don't do it like the others," she said, a 15-year-old young woman with intelligent and curious eyes. "My father's cowboys use spurs, whips, shouts. You just talk to him." Ethan, initially shy in the presence of the boss's daughter, explained, "My father said that animals are like people. If you treat them with respect, they return it. If you treat them with violence, they become scared or angry." Emma began to visit the corral every day, bringing fresh water and sometimes even food left over from the big house. She asked questions about riding techniques and listened, fascinated, to the stories Ethan told about his father. It was evident that the young woman had become enchanted not only by the boy's methods, but by his determination and kindness. When Colonel Sullivan discovered his daughter's visits, he exploded in fury. "You will not go near that kid again," he shouted. "He's trying to use you to gain an advantage in the bet." But Emma, who had inherited her father's stubbornness, was not intimidated. "Dad, he's not using me for anything. I'm learning things that no one ever taught me about horses and about treating people with dignity." The discussion ended with Emma being forbidden to leave the house, but she found ways to continue supporting Ethan. She left hidden notes with tips about Thunder's temperament, sent food through sympathetic employees, and even convinced the region's veterinarian to examine the horse for free. Meanwhile, Grandma Rose watched her grandson work with growing pride. Even with increasingly fragile health, she made a point of going to the corral every afternoon to see his progress. "You're making your father smile up in heaven," she would say, her eyes shining with emotion. "John Walker always knew you were special." In the third week, Ethan managed to ride Thunder for the first time. It wasn't perfect. The horse was still nervous and gave a few jumps. But there was no violence, no fear. It was a dance between two beings learning to trust each other. The news spread quickly, and on the day set for the final demonstration, hundreds of people gathered at the ranch. They came from neighboring towns, some even from other states, attracted by the story of the orphan boy who had challenged one of the most powerful ranchers in the region. Colonel Sullivan was nervous. He had bet too high and now realized he could actually lose his ranch to a child. The night before, he had even considered doing something desperate, like releasing Thunder or inventing an excuse to cancel the demonstration. But it was too late. There were too many witnesses. His reputation was at stake, and any attempt to cheat would be seen by hundreds of people. The moment of truth arrived. Ethan entered the corral where Thunder waited for him, now calm and confident. The crowd fell silent as the boy approached the horse, whispering words of encouragement. "Let's show them how it's done, friend," he murmured, stroking the animal's neck. Ethan mounted Thunder with the grace of someone born for it. The horse, which months ago terrorized grown men, now responded to the boy's subtlest commands. They galloped in perfect circles, stopped when requested, changed direction with impressive synchronicity. The demonstration lasted 20 minutes, but to everyone present, it seemed to last an eternity. When Ethan finally dismounted and Thunder lowered his head to receive a caress, the crowd erupted in deafening applause. Tears rolled down the faces of many people. Tough men who had arrived there skeptical now applauded fervently. Women openly cried, touched by the beauty of the connection between the boy and the horse. Colonel Sullivan was as pale as a sheet. He knew there was no way to deny the obvious. Ethan had completely tamed Thunder, and now, according to the bet, the ranch belonged to him. But then, something even more surprising happened. Ethan approached the colonel and, before the entire crowd, made a proposal that no one expected. "Colonel Sullivan," he said, his voice clear and firm, "I won the bet, and the ranch is mine by right. But I don't want to take your land from you." Murmurs of surprise ran through the crowd. The colonel looked confused, not understanding where the boy was going with this. Ethan continued, "I propose a partnership. You continue to be the owner of the ranch, but I want to create a place here where orphaned children like me can learn to work with animals, where they can have a chance to build a better future." The proposal was so unexpected and generous that even Colonel Sullivan was left speechless. The crowd murmured in admiration of the boy's wisdom and kindness. "Furthermore," added Ethan, "I want your daughter Emma to be the children's teacher. She has a good heart and knows a lot about horses." Emma, who had managed to escape from home to watch the demonstration, ran toward Ethan with tears in her eyes. "Would you really do that?" she asked, moved. "Of course," replied Ethan, smiling. "My father always said that the best victories are those where everyone wins." Colonel Sullivan, touched by the boy's generosity and ashamed of his own pettiness, accepted the proposal. In the months that followed, Walker Ranch transformed into the region's first rural education center for orphans. Ethan continued living with Grandma Rose, who regained her health with the medical care they could now afford. Thunder became the center's main horse, helping to teach dozens of children about patience, respect, and love for animals. Emma proved to be an exceptional teacher, and she and Ethan developed a deep friendship that everyone knew would become something more with time. Colonel Sullivan, transformed by the experience, became a more humble and generous man, fully supporting the project. Years later, when Ethan was already a respected young adult throughout the region, he still woke up early to visit Thunder. The horse, now older but still magnificent, always greeted him with the same affectionate neigh from the first days. "Thank you, friend," Ethan would whisper, stroking the animal's neck, "for teaching me that the greatest strength isn't in dominating, but in understanding." And Thunder, as always, seemed to understand every word. The end. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Ethan and Thunder has touched your hearts as deeply as it touched ours. This journey of overcoming love and compassion reminds us that the greatest triumphs are born not from brute force, but from gentleness and the determination to do good. To continue with us on this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories that explore the transformative power of love and kindness. You can find it by clicking right here. If this story awakens something special in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day we bring unique narratives that celebrate the best of human nature and remind us that there is always hope, even in the most difficult moments. Don't miss our next emotional adventures and tell us in the comments how this narrative made you feel. Until our next emotional adventure.